Alright, we got our tool installed on there, and you can see there's the nut on the back side here. It's got flats. If you need to, you can put a wrench to hold this while you're driving on this side. And this cup is out here so that when the bearing gets pushed out, it's going to come into this cup and fall out, and that plate that was back here is going to drive it out. There. Holy cow. That would be it. This is the outer race here. See, this is pushed in, and then we're basically pushed against that race until it pushed against this, which is slightly loose, and pushed its way out. We'll get a shot over here and clean it up and put the new one in. Something about the old hub. So I took the race off of the hub already, and this is the race. And what you do, if you don't have a puller that works on them, mine didn't work on this, so you gotta do the old-fashioned way. You grind a little slot in it, if I can get that to focus, and that slot, well, come on, kinda. That slot is almost all the way through. You can see it's not, but if we can get this to focus correctly, oh, it's not going to. Oh, there, see, you can see there's a crack in the metal, right where that slot is on the back side, or on the inside of it here. There's a crack, and what it is you drill all the way through, and then you take a screwdriver and you hammer into it, and you crack the metal, and then you can twist the screwdriver sideways to kind of separate it. You can almost just pull it apart just a little bit. And then what you do is when it's on here, when it's like that, you just take the screwdriver and you kind of walk it off slowly. There's just enough gap that you could do that. And so that's how you get it off on this side. And then we'll clean up this side, the remaining side on the car here. Alright, for installation of the bearing, it's the exact opposite of removal. That's what instructions usually say. I'm just going to take some wheel bearing grease and throw it on the outside. 99% of this is going to get pushed out when you reinstall it, but it's always good to lube it up so it just goes in a little easier anyway. You want to pay attention to the direction though. Remember we had that encoder on the back with the little magnet? That's that side, and then there's the outside. Metal on the outside and little encoder that goes on the inside for your ABS, so pay attention to that when you do your own. Just smear this on here. Just needs to be a thin film. Doesn't need to be swimming in it. Like I said, 99% of it's going to be getting pushed out anyway. So we'll take and just set him in. I'll just hand press him in there so he stays. And then we'll get our, there. Then we'll get our correct adapters to put on the face here, and it'll push it in, and it'll be pushing or pulling against the back side here. So instead of going inwards and we were pushing on the outside of this here on the way, pushing it out, doing the exact opposite. We're pushing on this on the way in with using the back side of this as the pulling mechanism. Alright, we got our tool set up now. Again, it's just the reverse, and we're just going to push it on in. You can see I got a little bit of grime right here. Just make sure you get that off. Just don't want to be pushing bad stuff into your bearing where it's sitting. Not a big deal if you do. It's caked in grease, but we'll go ahead and sink it up here. It sounded like it bottomed out, so that's how we know we're done. When it starts getting really hard, you know you're done. Alright, so it's a new day, and a combination of me wanting to get this done and also not remembering that I was recording this, I went ahead and put the hub back in. I pressed that in. I also installed a new lower control arm. I did not record that. That's a separate thing, but really it's one bolt back here, one over on the other side, right there, and then of course the stud that goes into the spindle. And so this is new. I wanted to get that in before putting this in. This is now in. I pressed that in the same way we pressed the bearing in. The one thing you have to be careful of is you need to get the right size backing plate to put back here that will get this in here so you can see. This backing plate, if we can get any light in there, there we go. You'll notice that the bearing actually sits inside of the housing, and there is a ridge, and that ridge makes this opening smaller than on the face on the outside. So what you need to do is you need to get the right plate here. I can't get any light in there, can I? You need to get the right plate that sits in there. See this very poorly, you can see that this doesn't really fit in there. So you need to get something small enough, boom, sits in there, and it's flush against the bearing and not the spindle itself. That's what you use to drive the hub in. And so backing out here again, in the hub, using that backing plate, I just used the main face, put it right on the face of the hub, and you drive it in the same way. That way you don't accidentally push the two halves of the races out the back. I did this the second time, actually. This is the second time I've done this. And the first one I damaged because the races in here are in two halves. The inner race actually has a split, and you can take and push the back race out, and well, you ruin your bearing. Get to do it again. So keep that in mind when you put the hub back on. But now that it's on, you can see that it has a very smooth turn. There's no noise. There's no oscillation in any way other than the way we want it. There's no, it's kind of hard to tell because this whole thing moves, but there's no up and down play. I'm trying to twist it like this with my hand. We'll do it again when the tire's on just to verify. And then if we can get right up in here, you can see it's seated all the way against the bearing. That shiny part is actually the inner race of the bearing, and then that rusted part is the hub. And so we push the hub all the way in as far as it can go, and we don't want to push it too hard. As we saw when we took the old bearing out, those ball bearings are just sitting in a plastic retainer, and you don't want to smash that retainer and destroy it, because then, well, your bearings aren't going to actually ride nice and smooth like they should. So you want to sink it in nice and solid, but you don't want to crush it in. Coming back over here, we're going to reinstall things one at a time. I'm going to start with the ABS sensor. Remember, this just sits down on top here. There's a single torque screw that holds it down. We're going to gently put it back because it's plastic. Remember, you don't want to smash it in there and snap it off or twist it in any way that breaks it. It does fit very tough though, so I'm going to get a pliers and kind of gently work it down. You know what? Actually, what we're going to do first, spray it down with some WD-40 or some kind of lubricant. Try and make it go in a little easier. This is actually a rust stopper. It's nice for kind of lubricating things too. It's kind of slippery when it comes out of the can. It kind of turns into a film after that. So what we'll do is just get that worked in there. Oh yeah, slides down pretty easy then. And you don't want to slide it too much. Remember, there was that flat spot. If I pull it back off here, there's this flat spot on it. you don't want to sit here and twist it 360 degrees because our bearing's in there now. This flat spot, remember, it was riding on the bearing, so you want to just wiggle it just a little bit to get it down in there. Nothing crazy that's going to snap that plastic off, so just gentle wiggles, get it seated down. We can put our Torx back, screw in. Doesn't have to be screwed down super hard. It's just holding the plastic on. So there. Remember, it faces backwards this way, so when the connector comes in, the clip's on that way. It doesn't come back and around from the front. So that's on. Let's take a look from the back side and make sure it's okay. Alright, looking at the back side here, you can see the little black tab up here. And it's going to be riding right next to the magnetic ring, that brown part. Looks like a seal, but it's not. It's a magnetic ring. And yeah, that should be good to go now. Alright, now we'll try and put the axle back in through the hub. Let's play around with this camera over here. Alright, deep grip. Now I guess what we're trying to do is put this spindle up and up on top of the little bump here. So everything can come together. Let's see here. We get this thread, but teeth. Straight edge looks like they are. Everything's tension here, so we get to work up. This is the ABS number, so that way. Look, there we go. Alright, so we got this started here. The threads on the nut on the axle, and I just took and used the plate from the puller kit, put the plate on here, hit it with a hammer a couple times just to seat it down gently, and then what we'll do is I'm going to use the impact to pull that axle in. There, it sounded like it bottomed out. We don't need to torque it down right now. We just want this to be all the way in so that we can push this arm down and get like that. Okay, and get this guy started in here. I'm going to clean this out a little bit better down here where the ball joint pin sits, and then I'll put it back and we'll put the bolt in there. Alright, I got a new bolt for the bottom, the pinch on the lower control arm. Here's the original. It got beat up pretty bad trying to get it out of there. It's rusty. It looks gross. And for $3 I can just go get new hardware. It's not going to have the Torx head, but it's still going to be 10.9 hardware. And in my opinion, these hex heads are a little bit better than these Torx. They strip out a lot less. And the shoulder length is the same. So this is a 55mm length. This is a 60. It doesn't matter much. It comes through on the other end and bolts, so it'll just have a little bit sticking out, you know, like an extra 5mm like that or something. But we're gonna put this back together now. Pushing it out on me. I'm gonna just put some wheel bearing grease on here. Help it slide in a little better. Help prevent corrosion a little bit longer. It'll just be better. Everything's better with wheel bearing grease. Alright, let's try this again here. Just gently tap that back. Get the wheel bearing grease all over it. Alright, I was trying stuff and didn't get this on tape, but I basically just put the block of wood under here and pushed it up with my jack, and then you can see it smashed all the way in. Yeah, so we're good to put the bolt in now. There, you can see that we got our lower ball joint pin all the way up, and the ball or the pin is seated correctly so that this guy just slides right in. Not a problem. So I'm going to put a little Loctite on them. I like to do that. It's probably not necessary. And then we'll put the nut on. Well, we're doing it. You don't have to make it off. You can say we're against the original size nut, not the original size bolt, in like the same diameter, same size shoulder. Really tight, basically. You just want to make sure it's the same thing over there. Yeah, I'll get my torque wrench and double check it, but it's on there pretty tight. Alright, 63 foot-pounds is the number. Yep, we're there. No problem. So, might be a little tight, but that's 10.9 hardware. It ain't going anywhere. So, that's good now. Alright, let's move back on to getting the tie rod and the brakes back on. Alright, the tie rod end here is 56 foot-pounds. That here? Pretty fine out here. Turn that way this way. Yeah, so the bucket nose. No, actually. So you can this. Let's see. Alright, so we're going to on a cross foot. On a torque here, so actually a decent heavy torque. So it's still okay, so actually we're really putting it down where it should have been. Socket, so we'll have to 15 socket until it's the plate. And then we'll double check the ending soon. Double check my torque here. Yeah. We're at the right number. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we got the tie rod back. We didn't take the end link off. We clipped in our ABS sensor. Could probably move this to be a little more centered. The bearing's in. It does not appear to move if you want to compare to the first bit where we diagnosed this as bad. It is now rock solid. I can't move this at all, except for the way it's supposed to move. That is, yeah, that's tight. Okay. Alright, so then put the rotor back on. I'll clean this up a little bit more. It got rusty just from sitting around, flash rust. And then put the rotor on, put the brake caliper and brake bracket back on, and then the wheel, and we'll make sure everything is good to go. Alright, go ahead and put our rotor on. There is no alignment pin on this. It just goes on whichever way it goes on. A lot of newer cars have alignment pins. There, bottom's out. That's on. Now we get the bracket for the brakes. Alright, so something we can do to verify our fix is we can do exactly what we did in the beginning and rock this by putting a couple of lug nuts on here just to hold the rotor in place without the brakes yet, and then try and rock this. And you can see this thing doesn't want to go anywhere. It wants to turn a little bit because you're turning the wheel this way, but up and down it's not gonna move, and it's looks like the other side now, and it's definitely not what it was. Alright, here's the brake caliper, or not caliper, bracket. If you're wondering, the slide pin goes inside the car, because here's the mounting bolts. They'll mount to the back side of the tabs here. I'm not going to show it. It's the exact same as being removed, except the bolts go in now instead of coming out. And you know what, just to make this easier, we're going to remove one brake pad. Alright, got the caliper and the bracket back on. They're bolted down. Only thing we have to do is torque this at 244 foot-pounds. So yeah, we got the tie rod arm in. We had the bolt for the lower control arm in. Those were torqued down back there when I replaced the lower control arm. We got the new bearing in. That's definitely one thing to check, and the hub is on. Everything was synced down as far as it could go. So I think we're good. Yeah, we just got to torque this down and then put the wheel back on. The other way to tighten this so you're not tightening against the transmission or rotating the wheel, you can put a crowbar into some of these studs, and I just put cloth around them to protect the stud, but it's in here like this with one stud below and one stud above, so when you're rotating it, it's going to be rotating the crowbar into the ground and give you some leverage to tighten on. There's 250, so make sure that Just like clicking it a few times to make sure it actually is at that value. And then we put the wheel back on and we're done.